Maurice Mitchell, thank you so much for making time. You are the National Director of the Working Families Party, fighting for an America that works for us, for all of us, and it's just so good to meet you. I've been following your work for a while now, and I'm like, I can get behind this, I think, and I have a lot of questions to ask you, and I'm just so pumped to have you on, so thanks for making time.
It's good to be with you.
How long have you been the National Director?
For almost 7 years.
Okay.
So I came on August of 2018, which was really intense time for our country's politics. So it's been a really intense ride since then. Previous to that, been a long time organizer. I'm one of a number of people who helped to build the movement for Black Lives and to catalyze it to become an international movement. And before that, I did a lot of grassroots organizing and electoral organizing and coalition organizing, mainly in the state of New York. And before that, I was a campus organizer at Howard University. So I've been
Wow, I love that.
yeah.
Talk to me about the Working Families Party. Now, look, I'm going to just level with you. I grew up, I'm not sure how much you know about me, but I grew up homeschooled, conservative, white evangelical tradition. That's where I come from.
Okay.
And I've just always kind of understood or thought that there's just two parties in the U.S., Democrats and Republicans. Wasn't aware that there are other political parties in the United States. Talk to me about the Working Families Party. What do you guys believe in? What are you advocating for? And also, why another party besides the two major ones that we have now?
Absolutely. Well, I'll go even further in our history. So the idea of having independent third parties or multiple parties is very American, right? The Republican Party actually is the fusing of two party movements, right? There was the Democrats and the Whigs before, right? And I'll tell you about how the WFP came to be. So the Working Families Party started 26 years ago. And it's important to understand what was happening in American politics 26 years ago. So Bill Clinton was the president, right?
Yep.
And he really ushered in this strategy called triangulation, right? And the idea around that was, okay, Democrats could basically corner the market on the electoral needs of all Americans if Democrats crib some of the fiscally conservative ideas of the Republican Party from the Republicans and retain some of the social rights that the Democratic Party is known for, and loosen some of the economic rights that the Democratic Party had historically been responsible for, and kind of loosen its relationship with labor unions and strengthen its relationship with Wall Street. Right? That was the strategy, and at that time, there were a number of people who were very disturbed by this strategy. People in labor unions, people in grassroots organizations, a lot of people in civil rights organizations were very, very concerned that the Democratic Party would essentially be abandoning its values and its base. And we saw what happened. So over those 26 years, what we saw during the Clinton era, we saw a lot of things, but we saw the Democratic Party really embraced NAFTA and free trade. We saw the Democratic Party vote in the '94 crime bill, which now that we look back in retrospect, we recognize was a really harmful era of mass policing and also mass incarceration. A real stain in our country's history.
Right.
Also, the Democratic Party under Bill Clinton, through this triangulation, they advocated for welfare reform, and we're currently talking about how millions of Americans are not going to be able to receive SNAP benefits. And so back then, the Democrats were actually responsible for these like welfare reforms that made it harder for people to be able to get the benefits that they needed, right? And at that time, there were people saying that, look, if you cross your base and if you violate your principles, you're going to hurt a lot of working people who have historically seen the Democratic Party as their home, right? When I was coming up, I was born in 1979. When I was coming up, even as a kid, I understood that the Republican Party was basically the party of the country club, and the Democratic Party was the party of the unions. And most people basically understood that, which is why the Democratic Party had so many working class people reliably vote for it, right? But over those years, when those free trade agreements made it harder for people to get work, where we saw all of those jobs go offshore, where labor unions have been attacked. This sort of like neoliberal. When I say neoliberal, I know that word gets bandied around a lot.
It
What I,
does.
what I, what I mean is, the market is God, right? The market
Mm.
could deal with everything. Everything's better through the market. Shareholders, as long as shareholders are happy, those are the only stakeholders that one should care about, not the community, not workers, nobody. That ethos became the Democratic Party ethos. There was a neoliberal consensus between the Democrats and the Republicans. And what happened was working people felt abandoned, right? And I believe that cardinal sin 26 years ago have led to all of these people feeling politically homeless, and then, ironically, a right wing populist movement like the MAGA movement has provided a home for some of these people. So and so the Working Families Party started 26 years ago in New York in response to that. And it was a number of labor unions and grassroots organizations that came together and said, look, we need to start our own party because we can't just kind of get lost in the Democratic Party sauce when they're more comfortable with making deals with Wall Street than sitting down and making deals and being hand in glove with labor unions. And over that time, we've transformed the politics of New York State in many ways. We're now in more than a dozen states across the country. We leverage something called fusion voting in New York, Connecticut, and a different form of fusion voting in Oregon. Um, I like to say we're a non-delusional third party. So we work bottom up, and we have figured out ways of getting over the spoiler dilemma that so many people face, right? So many people are concerned that, well, a third party is going to spoil the election. And the thing I like to say about that is like, look, it is math. It's not a myth. There's this real problem of being a third party in a general election where it's a winner takes all system, right? And maybe you have great ideas and you're maybe on the left, and you might take some of those voters from the Democrats, and it might lead to this horrible outcome where the Republican wins, right? That's what
Mm-hmm.
everybody fears.
Yep.
Um, and so we cook what we have in the kitchen. Fusion voting allows us to cross endorse the candidate of another party. So I'm here, I lead an independent political party. We endorsed Kamala Harris for president last cycle in November. We endorsed Joe Biden. He wasn't our first choice. He was our third choice. We endorsed we endorsed Bernie, and before that we endorsed Elizabeth Warren, right? But at the end of the day, we believe multiple things can be true. It can be true that um, in a binary choice, there is no question that Joe Biden is leagues better than Donald Trump, or Kamala Harris is light years better than Donald Trump. And it could also be true that we have a lot of policy differences with Joe Biden or with Kamala Harris. And through our party line, through the ability for voters in New York and Connecticut and in Oregon to be able to vote for Kamala Harris or Joe Biden on the WFP line, they could say, hey, we're voting for you, but we're voting for you based on the interest of labor unions and based on the interest of economic rights and civil rights and based on these values. And so when you look at the tally of those votes, you know that there's a voting bloc who are not voting for you to just do the same old. We're voting for you to really be tied to the interests of working people. And we endorse people up and down the ballot. So we know that there's congressional leaders that owe their career to the WFP voters, that we could enumerate the voters who actually made the difference. They were the difference makers
Hmm.
in these tight races. In places outside of New York and Connecticut and Oregon, like I said before, we cook what we have in the kitchen. So there's places like Philadelphia. Philadelphia is a two-party city, Democrats, WFP, right? We elect independent WFP people to sit on the Philadelphia City Council because Philadelphia has set asides for the minority party, right?
Mm.
And so historically, that just meant that Republicans have just gotten slots at in the city council without really having to compete. And so we competed with those Republicans to be the minority party in Philadelphia. And
Wow.
so that's why Philadelphia is now a two-party city, Democrats, WFP. And then in other places, because honestly, the Republican Party isn't a place for ideas, isn't a place for policy. It's become a cult. The real place for policy debates in this country is the Democratic Party. And the place that parties are able to debate the direction of the party, the values of the party, the positions, is through the party's primary. So, very recently, Zoran Mamdani, a WP endorsed elected official, assembly person in New York, we endorsed him for mayor and he won.
Mm-hmm.
The reason why we get involved in those primaries is that we want to get involved in the place in America where there's a real contestation for ideas, which is the Democratic Party primary. So we recruit people, we endorse Working Families Party elected officials to run in those primaries in order to decide where we move the pro-democracy movement.
Wow. It's like you said that before, it was so listen, truly really helpful. I was writing down a few things as you were talking. I'm like, okay, I can't miss that. Really quick, can you just explain it? Maybe you already did, but I missed it. What is fusion voting? What exactly is that?
Okay. So fusion voting is as American as apple pie, right?
Okay.
So the Republican Party was formed through the coming together of a fusion political party, right? Basically, what fusion voting allows political parties to do is to cross endorse the candidates of other parties. So voters in New York and Connecticut who are listening know this very well. When you're in the ballot box in New York and Connecticut where fusion is legal, you'll see A, the Democratic Party line, and B, the Republican Party line. Eventually, you'll see the Working Families Party line. On the Working Families Party line, you have a set of choices. And if you're voting for president, you could vote for Kamala Harris on the Democratic Party line or the Working Families Party line. All the way down, we endorse people on the local level all the way up. Now, you might say, well, if I'm going to vote for the same person, why does it matter what line I vote on?
Right.
Well, the reason it matters is that political parties like ours, and this is maybe a difference in terms of our emphasis, we really care about governing. We care about all the stuff that happens after the election. We're able to go to state senators, assembly members, city council people, all the way up to president and say, these amount of voters, and it's an exact tabulation. There's nothing fuzzy about it. Voted for you on our line. Now, you might argue, well, some of those people would have voted for me on the Democratic Party line if they didn't have a choice. Sure. But some of those people would have only voted for you if they were able to vote on the Working Families Party line, right? Because we do a lot of work organizing our voters, and we talk to our voters, and many of them have said, look, I feel horrible about what's happening in Gaza. And I feel like it's a stain on the Democratic Party.
Yep.
It's a stain on the Biden-Harris administration. If I didn't have the WFP ballot line to vote on, I don't know if I could bring myself to vote because of how tough it is for me to deal with what's happening. And knowing that the WFP is a pro-ceasefire, pro-Palestinian human rights party and an anti-war party, that allows me to feel like I'm voting my values. And what I'm doing is I'm telling these folks who I agree with on some policies, but I deeply disagree with on this policy, that I'm voting for you, but understand from where I'm voting for you, right? And so that allows us to, during governing time, leverage the power of our voters to be able to negotiate for policies and to sit down with city council people and state legislatures to say, hey, there's a likely scenario that you wouldn't be here, especially in really tight districts. Like in Connecticut, we flipped half a dozen seats on the state legislature from red to blue just this November with WFP-backed, labor-backed candidates. So these are like purple districts. These are competitive districts.
Yeah.
And those were very, very tight races. And absolutely, the WFP line and the people that voted on that line were the difference makers. Congressman Ryan in New York, the WFP line was the difference maker, right? These are very competitive races. And so our voters don't get lost in the sauce. They can't just go back and say like, well, a bunch of Democrats voted for us, and we'll never know why. We'll pretend that they voted for us for all the reasons we want to imagine they voted for us. We could say, like, no, there's a set of voters who are not Democratic Party voters, or Working Families Party voters, and we could tell you why they voted for you. And so let's pass a very, very powerful minimum wage policy. Let's pass protections for immigrants. Let's pass strong protections for labor unions. We could have that conversation and use voting after the election as a tool for governing. And, we believe that governing is so critical to the political process.
Wow. Yeah, that's, I never knew that. That's really helpful. Makes a ton of sense. And you're right about, especially around Palestine, Israel. I mean, I was at the DNC in August. It was my first time. Again, my world is Republican and conservative. I grew up on talk radio, right? So as I've kind of renegotiated my faith and found hopefully a better path forward in that faith that's more consistent with the teachings of Jesus, I ended up at the DNC. And I'm like, okay, like, what am I going to be in for? And I sat with the uncommitted movement outside who were advocating just to have Palestinian representation. And that never happened. I'm not sure if you know who Qasim Rashid is. He's a great friend of the show, human rights lawyer. Him and I were out there. And I remember thinking to myself, like, man, I feel so conflicted because I agree, like, we have to tell the truth. And the Biden administration funded the bombs that were dropped on the heads of children in Gaza. Like, that really hurts me. But I also know who Trump is because I track Christian nationalism for a living. And I know about the end times theology and the belief that we have to protect Israel no matter what that goes into that, and how much worse it would be for Palestinians under another, Trump regime. And so I felt so conflicted because I felt like there was really no good choice, but being able in theory to be able to say, well, I voted for Kamala Harris on this line of the Working Families Party, which advocates for ceasefire, lets her know that, yes, I voted for her, but also I want these policies in place. That's essentially what I'm hearing you say, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Correct. And then down the line, as it relates to, our policies on corporate America, like, the Democratic Party is the party of AOC and Mark Cuban, right? We just think that the tent is so broad it becomes incoherent when you're the party of labor unions and the bosses that they're currently fighting against at the same time, right? And so, which is why we believe more people need choices. Like, we live in a country where people have endless choices of yogurt and only 2 viable choices of political party. And I just think that that's a little wacky, and we think that people's positions are nuanced, right? Look, it's absolutely true that there were only 2 viable choices last November, Kamala Harris or Trump. And we know that people were arriving at their positions for all types of reasons. And voting for Kamala Harris doesn't mean I agree with all of the positions.
100%.
And I'm on board with all of this. And so having that choice really, really does matter. And look, we're trying to expand Fusion to more places. There's folks who are across ideology that support Fusion. So there's like Never Trump Republicans and centrists and moderates and others who are interested in starting their own parties. And we're more than happy for that to happen. There's a lawsuit in New Jersey. There's a lawsuit in Kansas right now working its way through on legalizing Fusion. There's a lot of interest around the country because it really does provide more choice for people to be able to organize their positions and not feel so limited by a very, very limited 2-party system.
I mean, you're speaking my language here. First off, I live in New Jersey. I'm 15 minutes across the bridge from Philadelphia. So Philly is like my local city. I'm an Eagles fan, the whole nine. So as I'm hearing you talk, I'm like, is there anything like this in New Jersey? Because I would love that. Because you're right. I mean, I think a lot of people in this audience absolutely feel like, okay, obviously Harris is light years ahead of Trump, but still not like, was the policies of Harris, not all of them were my favorite, especially around Israel, Palestine, and also just some working class stuff. Like, it's interesting, Mo, I rant too often on this show because I need a place to let all this frustration out. But it is so wild to me that in particular, right-wing media has been so efficient and so effective in labeling people who want affordable health care in the world's wealthiest country as radicals. Like, that's not a radical position at all. That is insane. That is
Don't get me
sad.
started.
Like, I
So
don't understand that. It drives me wild that we're like, wait, let me get this straight. We have seen, and this is data, right? We're not talking about opinion. We've seen the wealth gap explode, right? We've seen the ultra rich get way richer off the backs of the working class. And we just want not a rich wage, a livable wage, so people who work full time are able to provide for their families. Isn't that the American dream anyway, so called, right? And you think that because I'm advocating for that, I am somehow a radical Marxist? Like, are you joking?
yeah, I mean,
Help me.
it's outlandish. So I hear this all the
It's
time.
unreal.
I hear this all the time, and it's one of the reasons why I resist a lot of this. The people just kind of bandy about the far right and the far left. I'm like, okay, slow down, right?
It's a
We
mirage.
we do have ultra right wing movement in this country, and we have ultra right wing elected officials all the way up to Congress and in the White House, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's true. Could you identify who the ultra left wing elected officials are? And then could you qualify why you're identifying them as ultra left wing? What are the policies? Because I could identify the clearly ultra right wing policies. Maybe you like those policies, maybe you disagree with them, but they surely fit within what one would identify as ultra right wing. Really intense, nationalist, xenophobic, mass deportation. That's an ultra right wing position. When you look at
100%.
all the ultra right wing parties all over the world, they share these positions, right? Now, the Democratic Party, there's a widespread of different ideas. Some of the people that, when they claim to be ultra right wing, the people that I think they're talking about are advocating for healthcare.
Right.
Like, I mean, and then when you go all around the world, by the way, this is a settled issue.
Settled.
Right?
Settled.
So, meaning the left and the right don't even argue about whether or not there should be universal health care. They're just arguing how it should be done in most countries, right? Especially most countries that are very wealthy, right? It's just like a settled thing. And so it's absurd, and it's a media strategy, and it's one that we should always challenge, because this both siderism is dangerous. And I like to say, like, look, the far right is dangerous, like actually physically violent and dangerous.
Yes.
The far left is annoying.
Right.
And unless you could be annoyed to death, these two things are not the same. I will grant you that, in my beloved left, there's some people who I'm like, slow down.
Totally.
I get it. Okay. Yeah. Listen, I will deal with that over people who are planning and organizing and arming themselves in order to throw down the government when elections don't go in their direction. These two things are not the same. And it's absurd. It's an absurdity that there are spaces in media that treat them as the same. The other thing that I find highly ironic is that for years and years, the right wing has been clutching its pearls about quote unquote cancel culture, and have called themselves free speech absolutists.
Yeah.
And they have become the people that they claim that their movement is against. They are committed to canceling people, to using the state in order to deport people because they don't like the positions that they believe in or the things that they say. And let me I'm getting kind of worked up, but this it's like the both siderism rots your brain, and unfortunately the popular media has been a handmaiden for this both siderism. The popular media is so concerned with maintaining neutrality that it forgot its job is to have fidelity to the truth.
Mo, well, audience, if you can't see my head, I'm like nodding every time Mo talks. I'm like, yes, because my audience knows that we talk about this all the time. Because I use the same line of questioning. I'm like, okay, tell me who is in Congress that is a far left radical. And don't say AOC, because she's really pretty typical, just like liberal as far as like the global left goes. You know, like she's pretty even moderate in some ways. But like they can't give it to me. But I can give you example after example of far right politicians. Not to mention, and this is really important. I know you know this, but I just really need to rip off what you're saying. It's the same thing with media. I hear this all the time. Well, the far left media. Who? There is no equivalent of Charlie Kirk on the left, okay? And also, there's no alignment between the Democratic Party and whoever you might think is far left. For example, right? I don't know if you know this, Mo, but I go to Turning Point USA events. I cover them. I go on the ground. I've met Charlie Kirk. I go to his America Fest every single year. That's part of my contribution to try and dismantle the nationalist Christianity that raised me, right? And so I'm there. I hear Steve Bannon talk in real life. I hear them say the Great Replacement Theory is real, right? I have all of that. And I see Trump show up to these events. Charlie brags about how he has Trump's number on his phone. Can you imagine a world where Joe Biden goes, you know who I love? Hassan Piker. Hassan Piker and I get along great. No, he was kicked out of the RNC for critiquing Israel, right? So even if there is a far left, first off, they're not nearly as funded, they don't reach nearly as many people, and there's no connection to any kind of mainstream political party the same way that right-wing media and the RNC have merged. I mean, don't forget, right? The last Republican nominee for president was Mitt Romney, who they now call a rhino. So Trump sat down with Nick Fuentes, and like we think that's just like it's expected. Anyway, you got me all fired up now. You know, I'm ranting. But like, I say this now. Here's my question for you. You know, I see all this and I go, oh my God, it's unbelievable. So like I love what you're doing. I think it's so needed. Talk to me about Zoran Mamdani. I really want to hear about this because I didn't know who he was. I mean, I'm in New Jersey, right? All of a sudden this guy explodes on my feed and I'm like, I love this guy. He's amazing. Then I see you guys posting about him. So did you guys back him as a candidate to go against Andrew Cuomo? Is that the story there?
Absolutely. Let me tell you the story.
Tell me the story.
So in New York, we have ranked choice voting in New York City, right?
Okay.
And ranked choice voting gives voters the option to vote your first, second, third, fourth, all the way up to fifth choice. You could say, I think Zoran's the best, but I also love Brad Lander, so I'm going to vote him second, then Adrian App. You just go down the list, right? And in 2021, we had ranked choice voting. And, Eric Adams won, and he claimed that he had this mighty mandate. He didn't have a mandate. He just skated through. And our lesson was we felt responsible. We think he skated through because we did not organize ourselves and really leverage ranked choice voting in order to get many different voting blocks to basically vote for the same ideals. And so we were duty bound at the Working Families Party not to make that same mistake. Because what we had elected officials who were aligned with the Working Families Party who were competing against themselves, right? And so the people who followed them felt some acrimony against not just Eric Adams, but against people, an elected official that basically shared like 80% of the same policies, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So this time around, we worked this strategy where we had a lot of conversations with all of the Working Families Party aligned people that were going to run. It was a big open primary. So we didn't just have one candidate who aligned with Working Families Party. We had a number. And we talked them through this strategy where we said, look, don't be competitive with candidates that share a lot of your values. Try to engender the support of their followers, because maybe their followers might rank their candidate number one, but they might rank you number two. And it might increase your chances of winning if you do that. And we all have a sacred duty to make sure that Eric Adams or Andrew Cuomo do not make it through, right? That duty is sacred. And so when you're running, contribute to the anti-Adams, anti-Cuomo chorus and tell all of your followers, do not rank Adams, do not rank Cuomo. Adams left the Democratic primary. So it's like, do not rank Cuomo. And also tell your followers, vote me number one But look at some of these other candidates, right? These other
Mm.
non-Cuomo candidates. And eventually we're going to get to a place where the WFP is going to rank our own slate. So we endorsed a slate, and then eventually we ranked our own slate. And we said, once we get there, we'd like you all to join us. And whoever we're ranking number one, you should also tell, hey, vote for me. I think I'm the best person, but rank this person number two.
Mm.
And that was a strategy that we led for more than a year, working very closely, a lot of quiet organizing. It's very challenging, as you can imagine, to be able to organize people who are very competitive, who believe that they
Yeah.
should be the mayor,
Yeah.
to operate in a non-competitive way, right?
Yeah.
And we were able to pull this slate together. And it was a multiracial slate. It was pretty broad. It was people with different ideas, but they all basically believed that New York needed to be affordable for working people,
Yeah.
and that a vote for Cuomo was a vote in the wrong direction. And then eventually we saw something amazing happen. We saw to me that crystallized when Zoran Mamdani and Brad Lander cross endorsed one another, right? And
Mm.
you had a Jewish elected official and a Muslim elected official demonstrating solidarity in this moment. It was really beautiful. And their voters listened. When we look at the ranking, right, their voters really listened to that logic. And we think that that combined with Zoran's brilliant campaign. I mean, he is an exceptional candidate. He is just, his campaign was run exceptionally. He is an exceptional communicator, and
Yep.
his focus like a laser on affordability, on the basic needs of New Yorkers. I mean, it's funny, people are like tearing their hair out for what? For freezing rent, which is something that was done just a mayoral administration ago. For
Yeah.
free buses, something that was piloted already. Well, what are you tearing your hair out for? The people of New York heard it loud and clear, and despite all of the, I mean, all the hand wringing, the $25 million spent against him and spent against our campaign. I mean, none of that stuck. What people heard was that message, and to me, it's a bellwether. And if Democrats are interested in winning, instead of fighting this movement, they'll take a page from it. That working people actually want their government to work and to do big things. They don't want their government to do less. They want their government to do more. And we've polled on that. We know it to be true. There's a lot of folks who are like, well, we got beat in the general election. Maybe we should lean into moderation. I'm like, okay, define moderation. What do you mean?
Right.
What
Right.
does that mean? Help me understand what that means. What
Exactly.
issues are moderate issues? Because what I know is that working people are drowning, and they don't want moderate help for their drowning.
Right.
They're drowning under debt. They're drowning under the price of basic needs. They're drowning under the price of rent and housing. They're drowning under the price of childcare, and they want immediate relief. And Zoran's campaign really focused like a laser on that. And when there was any distractions, he always brought it back to the interest of the working people of New York, even when people were being really Islamophobic and racist and
Oh
throwing
my
all types
God.
of things at him. He brought it back to the people of New York, and the people of New York heard that.
Yeah, I mean, were you shocked that Andrew Cuomo was like supported by the Democratic Party and like ran as a Democrat? I mean, like, I I don't
Uh,
know, man. I mean, look, I'm just what?
So I could say so much about the Working Families Party's relationship with Andrew Cuomo. It's storied. It's the thing
Okay.
of it's the thing of like a Netflix miniseries. It's a saga, but we know Cuomo more than most people because he's attempted to kill the Working Families Party many times.
Hmm.
As governor, I mean, he had so many schemes because one of the things that he can't tolerate the most is political independence in his midst, and we represent political independence. We primaried him. We he started this thing called the IDC, the Independent Democratic Caucus. So this was breakaway Democrats in the state Senate who caucused with the Republicans while he was governor. He set that up because he wanted to control, like a spigot, what progressive legislation got passed and what didn't get passed. And so, whenever he wanted something passed, he would get his friends in the IDC to align with that position.
Hmm.
When he didn't, they would align with the Republicans, right?
Wow.
Imagine a sitting Democrat. This was while Trump was elected, supporting breakaway turncoat Democrats joining the Republicans, depriving the Democrats of a numerical majority in the state legislature. This is who this guy is, simply for his own power, right? So one of the like nerdy things about ranked choice voting is that, sorry, not ranked choice voting, fusion voting in New York is that in order to maintain your ballot line, you need to get a number of people to vote for you on your ballot line. He increased the threshold because he thought by increasing the threshold, he might be able to kill the Working Families Party. He started his own party called, instead of the WFP, called the WEP to confuse people. And it was the Women's Empowerment Party. This from a guy who has
Oh my.
credible
Yeah.
charges of sexual misconduct and sexual misconduct and sexual abuse and harassment. This is the type of guy we're dealing with. So I mean, am I surprised? Well, people fear Andrew Cuomo. So I'm not surprised that a number of people inside the Democratic Party, because of fear, because of his party boss sort of tricks, convinced people to acquiesce. Yes, because that's who he is. I'm also not surprised that the people of New York roundly decided to move in a different direction, and he was defeated because his politics is the politics of the past. And he ran a very smug, angry, really sad, dour campaign, contrasted by this positive, pro people, uplifting campaign with Zoran Mamdani. And so I'm not surprised that he lost, but I'm not surprised that so many people inside the Democratic Party backed him, not because they liked him or because they believed he was the best candidate, because so many people in political life acquiesce, and people saw the writing on the wall. They thought he had it in the bag, and so many people were just like, look, if he's going to be the mayor, then I want to get ahead of it, and I don't want to face his ire. I don't want to be counted as anybody that got in his way. And that's, an unfortunate political calculation for a lot of people, a calculation that we weren't going to make because we understood who he was. And we knew that there needed to be an independent voice and some institutions that were willing to stand up against that bully. And we're happy that we did.
No, I love that because, look, I mean, you can't call Trump out for being a serial sexual assaulter and then be like, well, our guy though, like, just don't look at that because he'll be great for mayor. It's like that drives me nuts. So like, I don't think it's too tall of an order to ask for our politicians not to have credible accusations of sexually assaulting other people. Like, I know, again, call me a radical, Mo, call me a crazy Marxist,
a low bar.
But like, I mean, wow. And I just think it really is like egg on the face. Whenever I see any Democratic politician endorsing someone else in their party, while then saying, well, Trump, he wanted to grab women. Well, yeah, then don't have people in your party who are guilty of doing the same thing. I will say, from my vantage point, broadly speaking, there definitely is less tolerance generally for that kind of behavior. I even think about corruption schemes. What happened in New Jersey? Was it a senator who was a Democrat? They found like gold bars. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
And like Andy Kim, who I love, like he was really quick to be like, no, this guy's got to go, and so was I. I'm like, get this guy out of here. But still, the point remains, all the more reason not to have people like Andrew Cuomo representing your party. It blows my mind. I wanted to ask. Oh, God.
If I did have notes for I lead the WFP. I lead the Working Families Party, but I share my notes with my friends at the Democratic Party, and if I had any notes for them, they're so interested in regaining the trust of working people, right? Regaining the trust of working people. They're obsessed with the boys. What happened to the boys?
Yeah,
Where are they?
Right.
Right? Young people, all like immigrants, a lot of immigrants, swung a little bit to the right last election. When you look at Zoran Mamdani's victory, young people, young men, right? Young people of all races, immigrants, right? They all voted in large numbers for Zoran. And so you think a Democratic Party that's kind of searching for itself would look at some of this data and be curious about how they could apply that. The second thing is, yeah, just some consistency. I think that people are looking for a anti-billionaire oligarch party, an
Yes.
anti-war party, an anti-corruption party, and that the party that chooses to consistently be that will be rewarded in this moment, and a pro-working people party, right? And I could see the Democratic Party, struggling with itself to figure out if it can be that party. To me, it's very simple. If there's a fight between labor unions and the corporations, you stick up with the labor unions, right? If there's a fight between these AI companies that are creating these algorithmic sort of programs to increase rents artificially, then you stick up for the renters, not the AI corporations and Silicon Valley. It's very simple. And we
Yes.
need a party that doesn't have to do poll testing to wake up every day. And when that party puts its pants on, it wakes up every day and it knows who it's fighting for and it knows who it's fighting against.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think both of us understand that the world's complicated. Politics can be complicated. Situations can be tricky. Like things can be complicated, right? And at the same time, like what you just said is simple and also is true. I don't want a party that wants to extend AI deregulation for 5 to 10 years. I'm like, no, we need to look into this immediately. Why aren't we regulating cryptocurrency? It's one of the biggest scams out there that scams people out of money. I mean, anyway, there's all these kinds of ideas where you're like, I don't get it. Why aren't we advocating for these things? And I think that part of it is because I do think right-wing media is so good at making common sense ideas, I hate to use that term, but I think it's true, sounds so radical. And also, we have a real billionaire problem. Like, I'm sorry, billionaires should not exist. Oh, radical, I know. But I say that because the only way to become a billionaire is to exploit someone else's labor. Bottom line, that's the only way. And I've worked for mega corporations before. And this is not against small business. I grew up in a blue collar construction business. I'm all about making small businesses have less of a tax burden, making the regulations a little bit easier so they can thrive and pay their employees fairly. That all for me is great. Of course, we're talking about the Walmarts of the world who use our government subsidy system, right, to pay their workers a barely livable, not livable, a bare minimum wage, and then rely on the government for other kinds of benefits. Like, that should not be happening for someone who's working full time, like full stop. And again, that's not radical, right?
No,
Man,
and it's
yeah.
wow. It's just like it's welfare, but only for corporations.
Totally.
Right.
I mean, that's what was so ironic about Doge, right? You have this Elon Musk character, right, who's like, we got to cut out government waste. Man, you have billions of dollars of subsidies that we're paying for. That must be nice, yeah. Elon. Must be nice. That must be great.
But it's so. Did you notice that when him and Trump got into the spat, then Trump yes. magically remembered?
I know. I saw that tweet.
I'm like, if you're a follower of Trump, aren't you at least curious? Like, wait, so you always knew that Elon was fleecing us?
Right.
You're just right. calling him out because he's not nice to you now?
Mo, I feel like you and I could just talk forever about this stuff, but I want to respect your time. I know we're getting close. By the way, you're welcome to come back on whenever you want, because there's so much to unpack here. And I think that in a time that feels so hopeless, we're watching our neighbors be kidnapped. We're trying to all survive. Like, we just don't know what to do. And again, this audience you're talking to is really largely Christian in some way, shape, or form. And a lot of us have come out of the world that is giving us Christian nationalism, and we're just like, it's a very heavy burden when we realize that our faith tradition is like is the biggest driver behind the MAGA agenda. And so, like, it's really nice to hear about a party that like sounds very reasonable and very like common sense for the working man. We're like, yes, this is exactly what we're talking about. I have a few more questions for you while I got you. One of the things that I wanted to pick your brain on is, like, how big of a tent can you really build before people start eating each other? And here's what I mean by that. Now, again, I want to clarify and just preface, I'm very new to anything that's like left, okay?
Yeah.
But I will tell you, since I've been in here, I have noticed a few times where I'm like, feels a little purity testy. Or like, if I don't have the right view the right way, I'm
Yeah,
suddenly the problematic white man. Okay, I get that. Like, white men are problematic, but like, I'm trying to do the work. And I think that
totally,
some people
totally.
might have this sense of like, look, like we both agree we need affordable healthcare done, but because I want it done this way, you think somehow I'm now problematic because I don't agree with you on this, right? This like purity testing kind of thing.
Yeah,
How do you handle that
right.
in this world that's not right, but way more I think common in the left wing space?
Okay, that's a wonderful question, and I'm gonna suggest some reading for you. Okay, so I wrote an article called "Building Resilient Organizations." You should read it, and you should have me come back, and we'll talk about some of those concepts, right?
Cool.
Because I think it might be helpful for
Okay,
you
bet.
and anybody in your audience that's kind of wrestling with some of these questions that you just surfaced. So the right and the left are built a little bit differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the left in this country is very, very diverse, very ethnically, racially diverse,
Yeah.
very, there's a lot of different people with a lot of different
Yep.
interests.
Yep.
And so there's always going to be contestation, more contestation on the left than on the right, right? Because and there's diversity on the right. There's like different, but there's a lot more, right, on the left. And so there's just more that you're gonna have to tolerate because there's more diversity, right? But what I will say is that what I've discovered is that when you're just kind of like tactical, when you're just focused on the next election or the next outrage or what we're fighting against or whatever, and you're not really clear on what we're actually fighting for
Mm.
and what the long-term strategy is for what we're fighting for, it's harder to build coalitions, right? And
Yep.
it's easier when you have this posture that is only oppositional for that oppositional energy to eventually go inwards and attack people even inside the coalition. And so I always say start with your strategy, right? Actually consider where we are and where we're actually trying to go, and understand that there's no way to go that place with just the people who agree with you on all the things, right? Once you recognize that, then you're like, all right, well, I need to build a coalition. If
Mm.
I want to win, if I actually want to get there, I need to bring more people into the fold, and that's going to include people that I disagree with,
Mm-hmm.
right? So so you get to that place of reasoning that you need to broaden the coalition so that you can win. Versus, I'm broadening the coalition because I'm a nice guy, right? You're broadening the
Yeah.
coalition because you want to win. If you want to win on universal health care, if you want to win on rights for unions, if you want to win on anything, you're going to need to make sure that there's a lot of people, and you're not going to agree on everything. So you need to tolerate difference if you want to have power and if you want to build a winning strategy. And you also, if you're organizing, another thing you need to do is create a low bar of entry so that people with all types of ideas could come in from wherever they're coming in and feel comfortable in the spaces that you create, knowing that they might have all types of viewpoints. If you're building like a mass organizing strategy where you're knocking on somebody's proverbial door, they're coming out of their home with all types of ideas that have been developed for all types of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
So you shouldn't be surprised when they open their mouth and they share those ideas, right?
Mm.
And your job is to bring them into a bigger we, and that's something that takes time and process. It doesn't mean if they happen to be saying things that are, really make other people really uncomfortable, it doesn't mean like not addressing it, but low bar of entry, high standard for conduct, right?
Mm.
So there's a way that you could bring people in with all types of beliefs and then acculturate them to like, hey, and this is how we roll, right? Like maybe you haven't been in a multiracial space before, right?
Right.
And so you might be saying these things, hey, but do you know that folks in this community that you're now a part of, they might feel uncomfortable when you say that. Why? Well, this is why, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
ways of addressing that as you organize with people, right? So it's not like a call out culture like you're
Right.
talking about, right?
Right.
It's a culture that is, one way I look at it, just to give you an example, I used to do a lot of martial arts. I'm doing some more. when you're in a martial arts class or in a yoga class or whatever, on your first day, nobody assumes that you know how to assume the postures, or you could kick or
Right.
you could punch or whatever. They just take you as you are. And it's the job of the students who are the most advanced students to spar with you, to practice with you, to and it's basically trying to apply that same strategy to newcomers
Right.
into our movement, right?
Right.
So that is our work. Our job is to make our side, our movement, the most contagious, the most irresistible, the most compassionate, the most understanding, as a contrast against their movement, which is a movement that is not based on compassion, it's based on it's a weird solidarity, because it is a togetherness and a we, but a togetherness that's about sort of surfacing and attempting to, in some ways, use government as a tool to um, to be able to broadcast your cruelty, right? Their movement is it is a solidarity movement that's based on cruelty. Our contrast has to be, not only do we want compassion for the world, but we want a movement that actually exudes that compassion when we show up with one another, right?
Yeah.
And if we do that well, our movement will just, by contrast, be the place where people want to be, will be the place where people want to party, will be the place that people want to enjoy themselves. And so the purity thing, just to get a little philosophical about it, like, you know, ideas around purity, there's a reason why nationalist movements also really cling to ideas around purity. There's a reason why
Hmm.
right-wing movements and racist movements cling to ideas around purity. I don't think those philosophies of purity really go hand in hand with movements that are about a bigger we, movements that are about compassion, movements that are about seeing the multiplicity of humanity.
Yeah.
You need to break out of these, like, binaries, these very clear binaries. I'm right, you're wrong, and
Yes.
recognize that most things exist on a spectrum,
Yeah.
right? That's, to me, so to answer your question in a very long way, um, you know, to me, it starts with understanding what the point is. Is the point that we want to live in a more compassionate world, or is the point I want to be right? If
Right.
the point is I want to live in a more compassionate world, then I need to create a movement that could bring people in wherever they're at, understanding that I might disagree with people based on all types of things, but I need to see them and have them included in this movement for compassion. And I need to believe that over time, through their relationship with this movement, that they will be transformed and I will be transformed.
Yeah, and I think that's really good. I mean, the way I changed my mind wasn't by being called a bigoted asshole on Facebook, right? It was friends of mine or people that I met throughout my life who were gay, right? Who knew where I stood at the time, and they held
Yeah,
space for me and they asked me
yeah,
questions, and those little nudges got me to think about things differently, right? That's how I was compelled to think about things differently. It wasn't by being screamed at. And look, and I want to hold space for both. Like, I think in this moment, especially politically, we have to yell. We have to say, like, what's happening towards our immigrant neighbors in particular right now is horrific and must be stopped. Right? We're building literal concentration camps. There's really for me, there's no nuance to that, right? That's not good. And at the same time, on the individual level, when folks come in saying, hey, I'm kind of curious, I'm still maybe more moderate, conservative, I have questions, that's the time to, like, want to be as welcoming and empathetic as possible, to hold space, to kind of nudge them along, because that means that their mind is thinking and open to new possibilities, right? That's kind of the
absolutely.
both and. Yeah.
Yeah, and we've done a lot of research because we wanted to understand where the working class is at. And I think a lot of people who are part of the pro democracy movement think that there's basically, like, people who are part of our movement or MAGA people, right? And
Right.
what I know through organizing, what also the data shows, is that there's like a 15% sliver of working people who are cult like MAGA, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, there are, the pearl clutching, MSNBC watching liberals. That's another, like, 15%. There's the, like, you know, pink haired barista who's always at the market. That's another 15%. And then
Sure.
there's everybody else,
Mm.
right? And so if you believe that our ideas are transformative in the lives of everybody, then your job is to get everybody else, all those other people who aren't MAGA, but aren't necessarily down with the pro-democracy movement to feel home with our movement, right? And so we only could do that if we meet them where they're at. And if we don't meet them where they're at, there's a cost, because MAGA folks are trying to organize them as well.
Yep.
And so that person that you talked about, who's actually, who's not a MAGA cultist, but might have some ideas that might not fit with the, across the line, whatever, liberal, whatever, is asking questions. You want to be there to be the person who can engage them.
Yeah.
And to me, you only could be in that posture if you truly are in a posture of humility and curiosity to do that. The other thing I'll say is that for a lot of reasons, that's not people's ministries, and I get that. Like there's folks who,
Yep.
based on their own personal story and the traumas that they've experienced, they're like, listen, I am deeply personally triggered by engaging people who have those views, or that's not your ministry. And there's plenty of really awesome things and productive things that you can do for a democracy that isn't ministering to people who are asking those questions. And so the other thing, like, there's needs for safe spaces. Safe spaces aren't low bar of entry.
Right.
Safe spaces are high bar of entry. So maybe, it's not your ministry to be helping people wrestle with the contradictions. That might have some, some views that are really hard for you to wrestle with. There's a need for people who are on the margins to have safe spaces, and for people to be organizing those things. So I also think that there's a multiplicity of positive, productive things that people could do, and there's definitely a need to engage with a lot of curiosity and humility with folks who are asking questions, who are showing up as best as they can, who are drinking from the water hole of, like, all of the mainstream media that might have them in a position where they might be like, well, there are a lot of immigrants here who shouldn't be here. Shouldn't they leave? Right. And they're coming from a place of honesty, because I know some people who are immigrants who ask those questions.
Yeah.
And they're not coming from a place of xenophobia or racism. Somebody needs to be there to talk to those folks. Right. And so I definitely believe that is like a critical role, definitely in this moment. And listen, there also is a role for the righteous anger to be expressed. It's a both and. I agree. A multiplicity of tactics type of person.
No, I mean, you and I, in that sense, are cut from the same cloth. I mean, I'm all about, like, the both and. You need. I've realized in my life that, like, especially as a white man in America, what I like, for example, I go to these Turning Point USA events, right? Yeah. I'm not gonna invite friends of mine who are black women, because, like, that's not for them to do. That's not their burden to carry. Like, that's not how that works, right? I can do this. I am what I call is bro-evangelical passing. I can speak the language. I can blend in. They know me. They know why I'm there. I have that bandwidth. I don't have bandwidth or even skills for other things that the other folks in my life who are not like me, only they can do. And you need that both and, right? And frankly, just speaking from experience, I think, I'm grateful for the black women in my life who held space for me early on when they didn't have to. Like, I look back now, and we laugh about some of these stories now, but at the time it was like I was good-natured but so ignorant, right? And, like, because of them, they helped me so much, but they didn't owe me that. Like, it wasn't an owed thing, And so if that happens, that's great. But I do feel like, especially for white folks who are, the term we use in the evangelical space is like deconstruction, right? For folks who are deconstructing, I think that it's important for other white folks to kind of be there initially, because sometimes without knowing it, you can put all this labor on marginalized groups that are like, dude, I get you're curious, but also, like, I'm not like your genie where you just, like, ask me a question, I spit out an answer for you. Speaking of which, and this is the last question, again, Mo, I want to thank you for being here. It really means the world, and we'll definitely have you back if it makes sense, because this is so good, and there were many other comments that I wanted to bring up, but we didn't have time for. You said the M word. You said ministry. I'm like, oh boy, ministry. Okay, that is a church word. And so I want to talk about faith, and I don't know if you call it progressive or leftist. I don't know, but whatever world you're kind of operating in, right? Here's what I've noticed, and I want to get your thoughts on this. I've noticed that in the more progressive left-wing spaces generally, there actually are a lot of people who are very faith motivated, like
Yeah.
especially in non-white spaces in particular.
Right.
Like their faith really motivates them, but it's not nearly as like kind of front and center as it is with like a Charlie Kirk type folks, right? Who might go out there and be like, I'm a Christian, God, God bless America, yada, yada, yada. There's a biblical worldview that I hold that says we have to have these views. It's just very different. I get that. I do. And I respect it. And at the same time, we know from data that even with like the rise of the nuns, people who wouldn't identify as religious, over half of them are still spiritual. And a lot of those folks statistically were probably shaped by some form of Christianity because they're American. And I do think that especially now with the recent empowerment of Christian nationalism, white Christian nationalism, there's a real opportunity for other political groups not to become Christian groups, don't misunderstand, but to actually help amplify people who are able to speak to the theology that is animating the Trump MAGA movement, right? Because here's what I think. Trump has no core values about anything. He's not a Christian. He doesn't think about this stuff. But what he did was he made a great deal with, in particular, white charismatics and like the white evangelical movement, and kind of played on their fears of like, hey, if you guys give me power, I'll give you the culture war that you always wanted. And there are a lot of people who didn't grow up how I grew up, who maybe do a lot of punditry or online commentary about MAGA, and they don't have eyes to understand the Christian side of this. And I think that this is a both and. I think that there's certainly a political movement here, but there is a theology beneath all of this. Charlie Kirk has a theology. Lance Wallnau, who Charlie Kirk platforms, has a real theology about taking over, the 7 mountains of influence, or the 7 mountains, because God gave us this calling kind of vibe, right? It very much is a spiritual, religious war that I think is going on. Talk to me about that. Like, I'm sure you're aware of those things. How do you see the faith side playing into the WFP going forward?
Well, I really appreciate how you frame that, because I think way too many people who are part of the pro-democracy movement or the anti-MAGA movement look at MAGA wholly as a grift. And I think that is like a misreading of one's analysis of MAGA, because there certainly is a lot of grifting happening.
Yes.
But there is sincerity inside of MAGA. And those ideologues who are Christian nationalists have a sincere belief in their version of the world, and they are legitimately organizing towards their vision of a theocratic country, right? And I think if people understood that, it would help them understand what's happening at MAGA, and also help them understand how we organize maybe a pro-democracy movement. So I think the analysis is absolutely spot on. I think, like, I listen to Steve Bannon and I hear a sincere person.
Oh yeah.
I hear, like, the way that I've talked about it is that MAGA is not necessarily a play that was written and directed by Trump. Trump is one of the main characters, but MAGA is a play that's written and directed by Steve Bannon, Steve Miller, a lot of these folks who are sincere ideologues who are advancing a particular worldview and agenda. And as it relates to faith, I think it's really critical that people of faith see themselves in a pro-democracy movement, and also could reason. For example, the separation of church and state. I think the separation of church and state, that principle is as much as protecting the state from the church as it is protecting the church from the state, right?
Yep.
And if you're a Christian and you really value your beliefs, then you could, for all different types of reasons, come to the position that I've come to, that we need a secular state, right?
100%.
Because you're a Christian, right?
Exactly.
And we actually need to provide some real argumentation for people of faith to see themselves in a pro-democracy movement. The other thing is that, we have this debate about whether or not America is a Christian country or not. certainly culturally, America is very Christian, right? And it was, I think, developed as a secular state that could be a state that could inhabit multiple faiths, but there's a cultural Christian strain there. And by not noticing that, recognizing that, being curious about that, it doesn't advantage you in organizing the people of America.
That's right.
And when we see so many people of color in particular
Mm-hmm.
being organized into right-wing nationalist white supremacist ideologies through
Yep.
faith,
That's right.
I mean, like as a black person who's organized in black communities, I could tell you that, listen, black people love themselves some Jesus. In fact, I have a friend who grew up in a black community as an atheist, and her parents made sure she was in church every Sunday. And they were like, look, we're atheists, but we're black.
Right.
And we're part of this community. And
Right.
to be part of this community is to be part of the communal life of this community. So we're going to church, right?
Right.
That's how deep culturally church is for so many black people. And so if we're going to win the war for the heart of the working class, we can't be neutral about faith, right? We need to recognize that that the crisis that people are experiencing, I think the crisis that working people are experiencing around the world, fundamentally, I would say, is a spiritual crisis.
Yeah.
And that spiritual crisis that people are feeling, I think, there's a lot of things there, but I think it's the culmination of 5 decades of those neoliberal policies that have said, let's just focus on profits, let's not focus on people. So we're basically being undergirded by a philosophy that doesn't put people's spirits, people's connection at the center, just puts at the center profit and how much you could value somebody based on their productivity, right? So people of all faiths, people of all walks of life, people across class feel empty.
Yep.
Right?
That's right.
There's a lot of wealthy people who are like, wait, I've done everything. I should feel like look at Elon. He's the wealthiest person on earth. You can't tell me he's not experiencing a spiritual crisis. He's the both wealthiest and clearly the most miserable person on the planet, right?
Yeah, right.
And so, so to me, and this is one of the things that I think MAGA is getting at, and probably one of the contributions of the Christian nationalists, is that MAGA has become a calling. The right wing has presented itself as a calling for so many people, whereas the Democratic Party is basically this thing that raises and spends money in order to get people elected. And people are seeking a calling.
For right or for wrong, I would argue mostly wrong. MAGA has a story to tell that people can get swept up in. And people are drawn to stories, right? I mean, even the stories in the Bible, we still recite a lot of them because they're just powerful stories for whatever reason. Right. And I think that, I mean, there's so much I could say here, but just to kind of land the planes, I know you have to go in a few minutes here. I just think that what you're saying is spot on. And look, I mean, I'm a Christian. Mamdani is Muslim. My friend Qasim Rashim is a Muslim. And my friend Andrew Seidel, who's a constitutional lawyer for Americans United, is an atheist. And we can all share the same values while having different beliefs that get us there, right?
Right.
We can all agree that affordable health care should be done for every person in America, including our MAGA neighbors and their children, right? Yes. And affordable and education, etc. And maybe on a theological level, Mamdani gets there because of what the Quran says and what the Prophet Muhammad says. And I'm like, hey, that's great. And I get there because of Jesus, but we agree on the same values. And I think this is a really healthy spirituality that I think I would love to see the left, broadly speaking, kind of almost reclaim of not a sense of that in-group, out-group, oh, we're true Christians, they're not. Because that's what MAGA does, right? And also, oh, if you're not a believer, you're less than. No, of course not. But the idea being, I mean, Jim Wallace, one of the most prolific progressive Christians in our lifetime, he kind of founded the modern social justice movement. He says the answer to bad religion is not no religion, it's better religion. And to qualify that, because some people might take that as, oh, as Christians now we have to have a new kind of nationalism. No, that's not what I'm saying. What Jim is saying is that ultimately secularism cannot answer bad theology. It just can't, because it's not supposed to do that. Okay. Yeah. You need people of the same faith, I think predominantly, to combat the rotten theology, the antichrist theology that is driving the MAGA movement, right? Because, and to go back to the whole labor thing, that's my burden to bear as a former conservative Christian who helped build this system, even though I was ignorant, right? That's not my atheist neighbor primarily or my Muslim neighbor primarily. It should be, we should see, Mo, white Christians be the first line of defense against the Islamophobia that has been hurled at Mamdani. In my opinion, it shouldn't be on him. It should be on us to say, excuse me, these are Christians doing this shit? Hell no, right? We're not going to tolerate it. And so I think that there's a way forward that embraces, by the way, a deep, rich, historical, even American idea of social justice found in the Black church tradition, the Black liberation tradition, the early Wesleyan movement, right? Abolitionist tradition. There's a rich theology there that is just waiting to be reclaimed. And I think that there's a way to kind of do both and in whatever, we're forming as we're trying to build new alliances and create a society where all of our neighbors, not just some, are able to flourish with dignity and respect and rights, etc.
I couldn't agree more. And yeah, I mean, this has been a great conversation. I know we're at the end.
We are.
But bring me back. We got more to unpack. We got, as you said, more to deconstruct.
I am here, Mo. I am here for. I would love to have you back on anytime. We'll talk offline and get that together. If folks want to get involved with the WFP or find you, how would they get involved? If they're like, yo, I'm in. Where do I sign up? Where do they go?
Okay, if you're in, you could find me and the WFP on all of the platforms that our techno-fascist overlords currently run.
Yeah.
I know the contradictions, right?
Yeah,
so
seriously.
At Working Families on all of those things, and they could find me at Maurice, so Maurice WFP. And then the last thing they could do is if they have their cell phone ready, they could text my name, Mo, M-O-E, to 30403. And my inbox is open. DM me. I'm very accessible. We're very accessible, and we're organizing. We want to bring the work. We're currently in more than a dozen places. We want to bring the Working Families Party to every single state in the nation.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Maurice Mitchell, National Director for the Working Families Party, thank you for your time. We'll definitely do this again. It was great meeting you.
It was good to be with you.